Hey everybody, it is June 12th, 2009. I'm Sonic Suns, and I'm making a little video, as I'm apt to do. And I'm wearing this hat, as I'm sometimes apt to do. Maybe I'll go halfway on the... I've been thinking about how we all too often don't understand things. Oh, it isn't that specific of me. Each other, I mean. Emotions. Feelings. Purpose. What's right and what's wrong. And it occurs to me that in the world of fiction, we make these things much easier on ourselves. At least for us, the audience. In the world of, particularly, knights in shining armor, that sort of fiction, old legends, and so forth, we construct for ourselves a world where we know what the flip is going on, even if we don't know, in a sense, even if we can be surprised and perhaps confused a little bit here and there. Generally, what ends up making a good legend is there some sort of simplicity, almost, even if it's complex. You know, within the Sherlock Holmes stories by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, there's a point where Holmes says to Watson, his assistant, which, if you didn't know that already, what the heck, you should read the stories. Sherlock Holmes says to Watson that the real world is ever so much more intricate and complicated and interesting than any work of fiction. And Watson disagrees with this. He says, no, in the real world, everything works according to normal, regular rules and such. He picks up, a random article from the newspaper and says, look, this is running by pretty predictably. The dullest of authors could write nothing more dull, I think he says. Holmes points out in that very article that, in fact, there are many details which make it more interesting than it seems at first. And for a while, after I read that, I thought, I agree with Watson. I mean, okay, so maybe Holmes got lucky on this one article that they happened to point out. But in general, the creator of fiction can do whatever. You could have dragons, you could have ancient spells, you could have things that don't necessarily involve dragons and spells. We're going to go on with that metaphor for most of this video. There's also realistic fiction, and that doesn't quite fit the theme of what I'm going for here. Not necessarily, anyway. Even though, to an extent, all fiction fits one way or another, because all fiction is created by humans, as far as I'm aware. Hope there are any aliens around here. And humans, being as we are a small part of this world, and being as we are imperfect and ignorant to a great degree, can only understand and express a small amount of all there is. Watson was saying that the author of fiction can make up anything. That the world of fiction is so much more interesting, and you go about daily life, and we're experiencing daily life all the time, and doesn't it seem rather dull sometimes? Rather predictable? Or even if it's interesting, doesn't necessarily make a good story if you were looking at it from a third-person standpoint. And then I played a really fun video game. Like, does that make a really good story? That one sentence, is that... But what I eventually came to realize is this. Holmes was right. The real world, as I mentioned a moment earlier with the ignorance of humankind, etc., the real world is far more intricate and far more interesting and far more detailed than any work of fiction that has ever been produced, or indeed, I think, ever will be produced. Fairly certain of that, but... But what Watson was talking about was how, in the fictional world, at least the well-written fictional worlds, or writing or singing or however you express it, the intricacies are far easier to see. That, to a large degree, is the point of fiction. The point of stories in general. Where, in the fictional world, knight in shining armor has to save a princess, slay a dragon, that sort of thing. That may seem incredibly wonderful and fantastic, but we've greatly simplified many deeper aspects. Namely, that the knight is the good guy, and the dragon is the bad guy, and the princess must be saved, and you gotta have courage, and okay, now we know what we're doing. In the real world, who is the knight? Who is the dragon? Does that legend necessarily even apply, per se, directly to any particular situation? It's weird, isn't it? I think we use fiction to evoke things. You have dramatic landscapes, for instance. Perhaps you're watching a movie and there's great swells of music to help you understand the emotion of a moment. Things are big and bold and loud much of the time. Again, I don't want to overgeneralize fiction, but just go with me. There is some of it that clearly fits what I'm saying, even if others are a little harder to see. Fiction does this to express something, to make it just more obvious than it otherwise would have been. And I think all these various lessons can be applied to the real world. There's hardly anyone with a magic sword and a dragon to slay, but there are quests worth undertaking. There's courage worth having. And yes, there's also cowardice. There's wisdom and foolishness, good or ill intent. But so often we ignore so much of our own real world that we need this fictional, this otherly perspective in order to see ourselves. We ought to realize that everything, every emotion, every deep meaning which is possible in your magic castle or whatever, everything that our hero can feel as he charges at the enemy or is defeated by the enemy, everything can also be felt here. And not just in a particularly dramatic place, like, or some other country, perhaps, some other blah, 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 other situation. No, here, where we are, anywhere that we are, wherever there are humans. You could have tremendous victory or defeat, tremendous joy or anguish in an office building, or in the suburbs, or in an elevator. I know I have. I've made a number of videos going over my feelings on things, pain that I've gone through, and dreams that I've had, things I want to do, and it's within this camera often, this is making videos, I can express myself a little clearer than normal, because then I can get to put things on the internet, and people can look at it or not look at it as they please. I'm not interrupting anything. But within the normal sequence of events, within the normal way of life, there are all sorts of limitations. You simply can't stand in an elevator with some random person and tell them, oh my gosh, what I really want to do is write these books that I've been thinking about, and I have some idea for a movie that I had, and I things I want to do, and passion, which is so much more easily expressed when there is a dragon, or a wicked sorcerer, or some alien invasion. I mean, I keep referring to fantasy. It works on sci-fi too. Whatever.